Welcome to another episode of Life Stories. Today, we dive into a powerful journey of betrayal, resilience, and self-discovery. Meet Sarah, a woman who spent years building her husband's empire, only to be discarded when she was no longer seen as useful. This is a story of how she found strength in the face of rejection, and how her intelligence and quiet support had always been the foundation of his success. Get ready for a transformation, where the greatest victory isn't in revenge, but in reclaiming your own life. Make sure to hit that subscribe button to begin today's story. I had always been the quiet one, the one who stayed in the background, pulling the strings and making sure everything was running smoothly. My name is Sarah, and for as long as I could remember, I had lived my life in the shadow of my husband, Ryan. To the world, we were the perfect couple, a successful businessman and his devoted wife. A glamorous pair who had it all, a beautiful house in the suburbs of Chicago, the latest cars, the luxury vacations, and of course, the private jet. But beneath the shiny surface, things weren't as flawless as they appeared. For years, I had supported Ryan in every way I could. I had been his confidant, his partner, his sounding board. I helped him make crucial decisions, strategized the future of his business, and kept everything running seamlessly in the background. He may have been the face of the company, but I was the one who laid the foundation, the one who pushed him forward with my ideas, my hard work, and my intelligence. But somewhere along the way, that all seemed to change. It was an ordinary Friday afternoon when it happened. We were at the airport, about to board our private jet for a weekend getaway. Ryan had been particularly excited, bragging about the plans he had made, all with his assistant and some of his closest business partners. I thought it was a chance for us to reconnect, for me to spend some much-needed time with him, to escape from the never-ending whirlwind of his work and my behind-the-scenes role. As we approached the plane, he turned to me and said, "It's a family-only trip. You'll have to stay back this time." I was taken aback. My first thought was that I had misheard him. Surely, he didn't mean it. After all these years of building this empire together, how could he possibly exclude me? But the way he said it, so matter-of-factly, so coldly, stung in a way I hadn't anticipated. "Ryan, I don't understand. I'm a part of this too. I've always been a part of this." My voice felt small, almost insignificant. In that moment, he didn't even flinch. "It's just for the family," he said, dismissing me with a wave. I stood there, watching him board the jet with his assistant, the engines roaring to life behind him. As I remained on the tarmac, utterly dumbfounded, the cold wind hit my face as I stood there, helpless and bewildered, my heart sinking with every passing second. It wasn't just that I had been excluded, it was the tone in his voice, the lack of consideration, the utter coldness that wrapped around his words like ice. There was no apology, no empathy, just a swift and emotionless decision that left me standing alone. A single thought echoed in my mind: how could he do this to me? I had spent years building his business with him, pouring my heart and soul into it. Every meeting, every strategy, every deal, those had been my ideas. Yet here I was, pushed aside, as if I were nothing but an accessory to his life, a mere bystander in a story that no longer included me. As the jet soared into the sky, leaving me behind, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sense of betrayal. How had we gone from being a team, a partnership, to this? I wasn't just his wife, I had been the silent architect behind his success. But now, I was nothing more than a shadow of the woman I used to be. The weight of that realization settled heavily on my chest. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't know who I was anymore. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring up at the plane as it disappeared into the clouds, the wind still whipping around me. In that moment, I felt utterly invisible, like I had never mattered. And then, just as the sound of the jet engines faded away, I overheard something that would change everything. In the distance, I could hear Ryan's voice. At first, I thought it was just the wind. But then I heard his assistant speak, their words carrying over to me. "Once this deal goes through, we're set for life," Ryan said casually, his tone devoid of any concern for what had just transpired. "I don't need her anymore. Everything's running smoothly now. She's not needed for the next step." My heart stopped. He wasn't talking about the trip. He wasn't talking about me. He was talking about the business. The one I had worked so hard to build. And just like that, I understood. I had been reduced to nothing. The woman who had spent years quietly supporting him, whose ideas had fueled the growth of his empire, was no longer needed. He didn't need me anymore. The anger that surged through me was overwhelming. But it was nothing compared to the sadness, the deep ache in my chest. I wasn't just excluded from a trip. I was being erased from the very foundation of his success. The betrayal wasn't just personal. It was public. He was announcing to the world that I no longer mattered. As I stood there, alone and abandoned, I knew something had to change. I wasn't going to remain silent anymore. The woman I had been, the one who had quietly supported him and let herself fade into the background, was gone. In her place stood someone who had been overlooked for far too long. It was time for me to take control of my life, to reclaim what was mine, and to show him just how much he had underestimated me. As the hours passed, I stood on that runway, the cold air biting at my skin, my mind racing. The words I had overheard played on a loop in my head. She's not needed for the next step. I couldn't believe it. For years, I had been at his side, working late nights, making sacrifices, and quietly building the empire that Ryan now took all the credit for. But now, I was discarded, deemed unnecessary. The betrayal was so much deeper than I had originally thought. I walked away from the airport with my head held high, though my heart felt like it was breaking. The anger inside me was fierce, but it was tinged with something more. I had spent so much time working behind the scenes, making sure his business ran like a well-oiled machine. But I had been invisible to him. How could I have been so blind to it all? How could I have let it go on for so long without confronting the truth? But now, I saw things clearly. For the first time, I wasn't his partner. I was a tool, an accessory, something he used when he needed it and discarded when he didn't. I had to do something. I couldn't let him get away with treating me like this. It wasn't just about revenge. It was about showing him that his success was never his alone. It had always been my intellect, my strategies, my hard work that had gotten him to where he was. I had been reduced to nothing. But I wasn't going to let that continue. I was going to take everything back, piece by piece. The first step wasn't something he would notice immediately. It was subtle. It was calculated. But I knew exactly where to start. When I returned home, I didn't immediately make any grand moves. I wasn't ready to confront Ryan yet. Instead, I took some time to think, to plan. The more I thought about it, the clearer my path became. I didn't need brute strength or loud declarations to get what I wanted. What I had was something far more powerful, my mind. My intellect, the very thing that had built his business. And that was the weapon I was going to use against him. In the weeks that followed, I began to quietly observe. I watched Ryan go about his day, his business as usual, oblivious to the storm that was brewing beneath the surface. He still hadn't realized what I had overheard or what I was capable of. I started to study the company's financials, contracts, records, partnerships. I knew exactly where the weak spots were. Every business is built on its vulnerabilities. And Ryan's was no different. I had always been the one to keep things running smoothly, making sure everything was in its place. But now, I was going to do things differently. Instead of just managing things behind the scenes, I was going to introduce small disruptions. Things that would cause just enough confusion to make him question everything. I didn't make any obvious moves at first. I started small, misfiled contracts, late payments to suppliers, subtle alterations to deals that no one else would notice. But to someone who knew the business as well as I did, they were deliberate. At first, it was like watching a delicate game of chess. Every move I made felt like it was leading to something bigger. I could see the cracks begin to form. But they were still too small for anyone to notice. I knew it would take time. This wasn't going to be a quick victory. It was about precision, patience, and, above all, strategy. The days dragged on, and Ryan went about his business with the same confidence that had always made him seem so untouchable. He didn't realize that I was already working behind the scenes. Every decision he made, every move he took, I was watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, It would be impossible for him to ignore. I had started to feel a strange sense of satisfaction as I watched him grow increasingly distracted. He didn't know it, but he was already losing control of everything he thought he could manage. It was a beautiful thing to watch, like a slow, inevitable unraveling, and I was the one orchestrating it. I didn't want to destroy him. That wasn't the goal. What I wanted was for him to realize the truth, that without me, none of this would have been possible. His business, his success, his empire, all of it was built on the foundation I had created. But he had never seen it. He had never seen me. And now, he would have to. The days stretched on, each one filled with an eerie calm as I continued my plan from the shadows. Ryan remained blissfully unaware, wrapped up in his own world, confident in his control over everything he believed he had built. I watched him, and a strange sense of peace washed over me. It was a quiet, almost bittersweet satisfaction. Watching him struggle, unaware of the cracks forming beneath his feet, was a small victory, but it wasn't just about seeing him falter. It was about me, about reclaiming my own life, my own identity. I had spent years working to support his dreams, sacrificing my own for the sake of his success. I had always told myself that if I kept helping him, eventually, he would see me for what I truly was, his equal, his partner. But now, standing on the precipice of everything he had worked for, I realized how wrong I had been. He had never seen me. He had never seen us, the true partnership we once had. I was invisible to him. The anger I had felt in the beginning, that gut-wrenching betrayal, was no longer the driving force behind my actions. Something had shifted inside me. It wasn't about punishing him anymore. It was about taking back control. It was about making sure that when all of this was over, I could stand tall and proud, knowing that I had reclaimed my worth, my power. For the first time in years, I was starting to feel like the woman I had once been. The woman who had her own dreams, her own ambitions. I didn't need Ryan to define me. I had spent so long believing that I did, thinking that my purpose was tied to his success, to his recognition. But now, I knew the truth. I had always been enough on my own. I had always had the ability to shape my future, to carve my own path. And it wasn't just about revenge, it was about the freedom to be who I was meant to be. Without him, the more I reflected on everything I had endured, the clearer the path forward became. It wasn't easy, none of this had been easy. But the realization that I was no longer beholden to him, to his needs, his ambitions, was freeing. The chains that had held me in place for so long were starting to loosen. In the quiet of the evening, I would sit in my empty living room, the ticking of the clock on the wall the only sound, and I would think about the future. I no longer saw myself as a background player in someone else's life. I was stepping into my own story, one that didn't require Ryan to be at the center of it. For the first time in a long time, I could breathe, and that's when it hit me. I wasn't just doing this for myself. I was doing this for every woman who had ever been overlooked. For every partner who had been pushed aside in the name of someone else's success. I wasn't just reclaiming my life, I was making a statement. I was saying that I mattered. That my contributions mattered. That I was not disposable. Ryan was still completely oblivious to the storm brewing around him. He was still basking in the success he thought he had achieved on his own, unaware of the cracks that were spreading through the foundation of his empire. But I wasn't in a rush. I wasn't interested in quick victories. This wasn't about destroying him, it was about letting him realize, when the time came, that he had built his entire life on the support and intelligence of the one person he thought he could discard. As I continued to watch his empire slowly unravel, I felt a strange sense of calm. The storm was coming, and I had already positioned myself to ride it out, untouched. I didn't need to make any big moves, and I didn't need to tell him anything. I knew he would come to me when he realized just how much he depended on me. It wasn't about me needing him anymore, it was about him needing me. And the realization that would hit him like a ton of bricks. For now, I let the wheels of the business turn, letting the cracks deepen, and I waited, because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't in the heat of the moment, it's in the patience to let everything fall apart, knowing that you were the one who held the pieces together all along. In the weeks that followed, Ryan's world continued to crumble. Bit by bit, his company, once a shining example of his success, was now on the brink of collapse. Investors pulled out, clients began seeking other options, and the media began to whisper about the fall of the once great mogul. What he hadn't realized, what he never saw coming, was that the very empire he had built was supported by the one person he had pushed aside, the woman who had always been there, quietly holding it all together. As his business unraveled, Ryan finally came to me. The desperation in his eyes was something I had never seen before. He came to me, seeking help, but I knew it was too late. All the apologies in the world couldn't erase the years of neglect. The years of sacrifice I had made for him. I had already moved on. "You need me," I said, my voice steady, almost cold. "Where was your trust when it mattered? Ryan? Where was your appreciation for everything I did?" He stood there, speechless, realizing that everything he had built was fragile without me. But I wasn't interested in his regrets. My journey had already begun, a journey where I was no longer defined by his success or his failures. I had reclaimed my power, and I was free. This wasn't about revenge anymore, it was about me. The future was mine to shape, and I would no longer live in the shadows. The woman I had been was gone, and in her place stood someone strong. Someone who had learned the most important lesson of all, that my worth was never tied to anyone else's success. If you've been inspired by this story of resilience and self-discovery, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world as we continue to grow this incredible community together. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you in the next life story.